All right, my clock shows a 12 o'clock time frame, so we want to get started. So we give our presenter as much time as possible. We'd like to welcome you to this continuing education course. This is sponsored by the AI Central Utah section. So we're grateful to have you there. My name is Bruce Fallon. I'm the president-elect for the Central Utah section, and grateful to have you to join us. We have with us George Reid from DFCM, and he's going to be our speaker today. There's just a few things to go through as we get started. Again, if you'll, as you get on, please remember to mute. There will be a chance to ask questions. If you'll include that in the chat as we go along, then I will go ahead and read those questions to George, and so we can answer whatever questions that you may have. For this course, it is a 1 HSW Learning Unit credit. If you want the credit, if you'll please send an email to info@aiautah.org. We'll put that email in the chat, and please include your AIA number if you're an AIA member, to be able to provide to get credit for that, and then he will send out a certificate as well as get that registered with AIA. Wanted to give a reminder for those of you who are part of the Central Utah section that we have our annual meeting coming up on November 9th. It'll be at 6:30. That information has already been publicized, in the newsletter, AI Utah newsletter. You'll probably see it again this Friday. Our guest speaker that night will be Mackenzie Bauer. She's one of the founders of Thread Wallets, and as well as a group called Female Founders Only. So we're excited to hear from her, as well as have some food together. So we have that upcoming event. And then as we look into next year, we're looking at some options for some various activities, construction tours, as we have done in the past. We've talked about doing a firm tour with including the AIS UVU students. We're working on a continuing ed course on the building envelope, as well as one on HR, so human resources for small firms. And then George and I were just talking as we got onto this about the need for, maybe we need a part 3 on this one. So this is part 2. Last one was just kind of a general overview of the changes to the IBC 2021. And this one is focused specifically on the ICC-ANSI, the accessibility portion of the building code. But we wondered if we needed to do one on the energy code. So if that's something that you think would be valuable for you, if you'll maybe put it in the chat, that would be a good idea, and we can do that. So the last thing I wanted to do is mention too, for the Central Utah section, we are looking for individuals who are interested in serving on the board as president-elect and secretary for next year. So if you have an interest in doing that, again, if you'll just reach out to me, that would be great. So as I mentioned, this is part 2 of our 2020 IBC Code update. And so this is a discussion specifically on the ICC-ANSI. And we've got George Reid, who's the assistant building official with the state of Utah, here with us to discuss these changes, which are, going from a 60-inch to a 67-inch radius. Turning radius is not the only thing that we're going to be looking at today, right, George?
That's right. All right, thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Like Bruce said, my name is George Reid. I'm assistant building official for the state of Utah. My area encompasses basically Utah County up to Daggett County south. So if you are working on any state projects in that area, I'll be your code official for those projects. Before coming on to the state, I worked for Vineyard City. I worked with Bruce Fairmount in Vineyard City. And prior to that, I was up in Park City. I've taught for Salt Lake Community College, and other code groups, whatnot, around the state and even a little bit outside of the state of Utah. I will say that although I teach a fair amount, this is only the second time, the first time being part 1 of this series, that I've done a fully electronic version of the training. So Normally, I do have an audience that provides a little better interaction and whatnot. So I apologize if it's a little clunky. It is kind of hard talking to a laptop, as I'm sure most of you have experienced. But anyway, our objectives for today are to discuss the changes found in Chapter 11 of the Accessibility chapter of the 2021 IBC, and then give a brief overview of the changes from the 2009 to the 2017 ANSI A117. As most of you are probably aware, the changes went into effect July 1st of this year. So these codes are already being used. Anything submitted after July 1st needs to follow the new code. So it is based off of application date. So as long as you got your application in prior to July 1st, you'd be on the 2018 and the 2009 ANSI A117. But anything from now on, we do need to follow this new code. A couple important links that I have up on the screen there. Those are the links to get to the 2021 IBC, the 2017 ICC A117, and then also the state amendments. But you can also just Google 2021 IBC or 2017 ICC A117, and one of the first things that'll pop up is the ICC public access, and that gives you access to the code as written, and then you do need to go to the amendments to see if the state of Utah has changed that at all. For today's presentation, I will say that there are no amendments to Chapter 11 in the IBC, and there are no amendments to the ICC A117. In state law, you can find a couple places, but it references the 2009. We are working on fixing those. One thing I will say is, I'm sure a lot of you know Tom Peterson. One of my, he's the building official over the other half of the state. So he's also a state legislator, and he is working on a bill that would purchase the premium access through ICC. And so the premium access allows you to search the content, copy the content, and whatnot, and that would be given to basically anybody within the state. He hasn't quite hammered out the details. It may be tied to licensed individuals, but we're working through that. We definitely want to make sure that architects, contractors, and whatnot have the access. So be looking for that. That would be a great benefit to the state of Utah to have all the codes at your fingertips and be able to search those. So hopefully that bill gets passed and we can get you all the premium access this next year. As we're going through the code, one thing to keep in mind, if you are looking at a physical copy, there are marginal markings that will identify changes in the code. So if it has a solid bar next to a code section, that section has been changed. If there's an arrow or an asterisk, an arrow indicates that it's been deleted, an asterisk indicates that it's been moved, double asterisk means that that's where the section has been moved to. So if you're looking at an electronic version, the changes will be highlighted in blue. So as you're going through the 2021 IBC or the 2017 A117, pay special attention to the sections that are highlighted in blue, because those are the sections that have been changed. Now they'll highlight them in blue, whether it's a significant change or just a change in structure of the sentence, grammar, whatever it may be. But just pay special attention to the sections that are highlighted in blue. All right, so before we dive into the 2021 IBC, why do we have codes? Why accessibility codes? Why do we have Chapter 11 for accessibility and the standard? Well, first and foremost, you all design buildings and they're big, beautiful buildings and they're great buildings, but we want to make sure that people can get in there and use those buildings. And it's easy to boil that down to people in wheelchairs. That's what we normally think when we think about the accessibility code. However, I will say personally, last fall, I was out deer hunting and actually was coming out of my camp trailer and the stairs were icy. I slipped and fell on the stairs and I ruptured my patellar tendon. And so a complete rupture. My lower leg, I couldn't move. So I had to have it surgically put back together, and I was in a straight leg brace for about 8 weeks, where I couldn't bend my knee to make sure that patellar tendon grew back together. Now I'm a fairly large guy. I'm 6'8", and having a 40-inch inseam, I've got a pretty long leg, and so that leg was just stuck out there straight. Now, because of that, I have a newfound appreciation of Chapter 11 and the accessibility code. The clearances and whatnot, I really appreciated and even thought that they were a little lacking in some areas. But if any of you have gone through an experience like that or whatnot, you really do find a new appreciation and a realization that the accessibility code is for all, even if it's just for a brief point in time. But it is for all, not just people confined to a wheelchair. So as I mentioned earlier, we adopted the 2021 International Building Code. The building code is the charging language that takes us to the ANSI code. And so we go to the Chapter 11 of the IBC to find out what needs to be accessible. Once we find out that it needs to be accessible, then we go to the A117 to see how to make it accessible. There were some changes. I'll highlight the majority of the changes, but just be aware that today we aren't going to be able to cover everything. We're just going to kind of catch the highlights and some of the major changes. The first major change that I'm going to talk about is automatic doors required. Now, most of you are designing your buildings, especially those with a higher occupant load, with automatic doors on your primary entrances. That has now been codified to be required. So in facilities with an occupant load as indicated in the table, we do need to provide the public entrances with full power operated or low energy power operated door. And then in a vestibule, it does need to encompass both doors. So the occupancies that those that are required in is our A occupancies if they have an occupant load of greater than 300, or a B, M, or R1 with an occupant load of 500. When you have a mixed use, then we're going to total the sum of the building and add those up and apply the most restrictive. So keep that in mind. The state of Utah, for those of you working on DFCM projects, we've had a standard in place for quite a while that we require those on any building. So DFCM buildings, we are still staying with the entrances do need to be provided with automatic door openers. There is now a requirement for parking meters and pay stations to be accessible when they are serving an accessible stall. So if you have pay meters, whatnot, and there's an accessible stall there, we do need to make sure that the pay stations or meters meet all the requirements for accessibility for reach ranges and buttons and all those things. So that is new to our code this year. There's also been an addition to require vehicle charging stations. Our electric vehicles, you know, they're getting very popular now. They do require those electric charging stations to be accessible. Those electric vehicle charging stations have to be not less than 5% of the spaces on site served by the charging stations, but not fewer than one for each type. So if you have different types of charging stations, we need to make sure that we have an accessible parking stall for each one of those types. So if it's Tesla or whatever it may be, each one of those different types does need to be accessible. The spaces themselves do need to be compliant with a van accessible parking space. So we need the 132 inches minimum width with the aisle for those spaces. So it is a pretty significant change for those. We can't just take one and throw some paint on the ground and a placard on a post and call it an ADA stall. It does need to be a van accessible parking stall. Now that not less than 5%, that is for the vehicle charging stations themselves. So it's in addition to the required accessible parking for the site. So we can't just take a required accessible parking stall for the building and put an electric vehicles charging station there and call it a day. It's in addition to. So we need to make sure that we're adding the 5% for the electrical vehicle charging stations and not counting the one for the building itself. We've had some changes to, oh, go ahead, Bruce.
George, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you go back a slide if you would?
You bet.
It reads that they shall comply with this section. Does that mean they comply if they are provided or that they are now required?
Great question. So they are not required. It's only if they are provided. Great question. So you don't need to provide electrical vehicle charging stations. However, if you do, we do need at least one of those to be accessible and not less than 5%.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right, so dwelling units, sleeping units, we've had some changes, especially in our healthcare facilities, our I occupancy groups. The changes are, we need to have them accessible. In condition 1, at least 4%. However, the new section says they need to be dispersed among various classes of units. So in our I occupancies, we need to take each type of unit, caregiving, or facility and disperse them. So in the different care units, depending on the level, we need to make sure that each one of those is provided with an accessible unit. And one thing that has been added, as per request from the healthcare industry, is our exceptions to the accessible units regarding the bathrooms themselves. So in our hospitals and care facilities, a lot of people are needing assistance in the bathroom and whatnot. And when you design an accessible restroom with the regular standard, the toilets and grab bars and everything are such a way that it actually prohibits caregivers from helping the patients in the restroom. So we now have a new section that addresses assisted toileting and assisted bathing, which is exceptions 1 and 2 there. That we'll talk about here in just a minute. So in our I1 condition 2, we need at least 10%, but not less than 1. Again, it is dispersed amongst the different various classes of units. And then also we have the exceptions for the assisted toileting and bathing. The same also applies in our nursing homes. So our nursing homes, they are allowed to have the assisted toileting and bathing. It is important to note, just like the vehicle charging stations, it is not required. We're limited to the number that you can provide in the assisted toileting and bathing. They're not required, but you're limited to the amount that you can have. However, if you do choose to have those, they do need to meet the requirements set forth in 1110.2.2. So in 1110.2.2, when we have assisted toileting and bathing, we're given a little extra width around the toilet and whatnot to make sure that caregivers can get in and assist a patient without having the toilet as close to the wall as it normally is required. So the center line of the toilet in these assisted toileting facilities shall not be less than 24 inches and not greater than 26 inches. So a little extra clearance there to get an able-bodied person around there to assist a person that needs help. The clearance around the water closet, we do need to have not less than 66 inches. So we have a little more clearance that's required. And then our clearance depth is extended out to 78 inches. So it's a bigger clearance space, again, intended for caregivers to aid a patient. We are still allowed to have the overlaps of clearances as per ICC-A117.1-2017, but we still can't have the fixtures within those clearance spaces. Our heights and whatnot are consistent with others, but as far as the toilets are concerned, but we do have a requirement for swing up grab bars. Again, when I was laid up with my leg in a straight leg brace, swing up grab bars are a wonderful thing. When you have those grab bars, it really helps you stand up. So these assisted toileting spaces do have a requirement for swing up grab bars. They need to be not less than 14 inches, not greater than 16 inches away from the center line. And the length of the grab bar is 36 inches measured from the end of the wall, with the top position of 30 inches. So not less than 30 inches, not more than 34. The intent is those swing up grab bars can help somebody get themselves up off that toilet. Flush controls are the same. They do need to be on the clear floor space side. And then the dispensers and whatnot shall be not less than 24 inches, not greater than 36 away from the wall. Also in these assisted toileting and bathing, we do have some variations for our roll-in type showers. So the standard roll-in type shower compartment shall have a clear inside dimension of not less than 60 inches in width and 30 inches in depth. One big difference from this with a typical shower compartment is this is a not less than 60 inches. As I'm sure all of you are aware, our shower compartments typically in the ANSI A117 will say 60 inches as an exact measurement. So these ones can be larger than 60. It's not less than 60. Must have a duplicate side there, sorry. So a clearance of not less than 60 inches in length and 60 inches in width for the open face of the shower compartment. 30 inches in depth shall be provided. Exceptions are a lavatory complying with 606 shall be permitted to be at one end of the clearance, and where the shower compartment exceeds minimum sizes, the clear floor space shall be adjacent to the grab bars not less than 30 inches from the back wall. We do have to have grab bars. The back wall shall extend to the length of the wall and extend within 6 inches maximum from the 2 adjacent side walls. Our sidewall grab bars shall extend the length of the wall and extend within 6 inches of the adjacent back wall. Sections there. One thing that is different from our assisted bathing stalls is wall-mounted folding seats shall not be installed. So in these assisted bathing compartments, we do not want to see a folding bench. Again, it's intended to have somebody be able to come in there and help them. And so that bench or seat would prohibit that. So in standard roll-in type showers, the controls in hand showers shall be located not less than 38 inches and not greater than 48 inches above the shower floor. Control shall be located to facilitate caregiver access. So again, the whole intent of this is to make sure a caregiver can come in and help a person bathe. Thresholds are the same as a typical shower, and these sections are very similar to, or are the same as a typical shower compartment. One new requirement is our family or assisted use toilet rooms are now required to have an indicator indicating that the room is occupied or vacant. A lot of the locks and whatnot have those integral, but I just make sure when you're speccing those out that on your family or assisted use toilet and bathing facilities, we do have an indicator on those doors. Water bottle filling stations. These become very popular. It is now required to make those accessible. And bottle filling stations over drinking fountains for standing persons are not required to be accessible, provided that bottle filling stations are also located over the drinking fountains for persons using wheelchairs. So if it's on the high water fountain, we also need to provide one on the low. So keep that in mind when you're installing these bottle filling stations. Sales and service counters. Not much change to this code section. However, they did add windows. Before it was just sales and service counters, but it is now incorporated windows. So if you have a sales or service window, those do need to meet the requirements for accessibility. So our reach ranges and whatnot, and our approaches, clear floor space, those do apply, even if no countertop is provided. In our recreational facilities, again, this section hasn't changed much other than cold baths have been included. So swimming pools, wading pools, cold baths, hot tubs, and spas all need to be on an accessible route. Really the only change here is cold baths have been added to that section. Signs required by 403.4 of the International Plumbing Code, identifying toilet rooms and bathing rooms shall be visual characters, raised characters, and Braille complying with ICC A117.1, where pictograms are provided as designations for toilet rooms and bathing rooms. The pictograms shall have visual characters, raised characters, and Braille. So on our toilet rooms, we do need to have the Braille indicators, and needs to meet the specifications as found in ICC A117. So that's the majority of the changes to Chapter 11 in the IBC. Now, Chapter 11 in the IBC, it does say that buildings and facilities shall be designated and constructed to be accessible in accordance with this code and ICC A117. So that's our charging language. If we go to our reference standards in Chapter 35 of the IBC, you'll see ICC A117-17, indicating that the now adopted accessibility standard for the state of Utah is the 2017 ICC A117. And just a quick note, in 2009, it was the ANSI A117, but now the International Code Council, or ICC, does control that standard and publishes it. So they've removed the ANSI portion of that. So when you're talking about the 17 version, it's the ICC A117, not the ANSI A117. Before I get into the significant changes to the 2017, which there are quite a few, we're just going to cover some of the major ones and highlights. When you're designing the accessibility portions of your project, make sure to go into that link that I showed earlier, look at the specific installations that you have and the chapters within ANSI A117. Make sure that there aren't any changes that'll surprise you, because there are a fair number of changes. We're just going to cover kind of some of the key ones. I do want you to pay attention for the rest of this presentation, but before I dive into the changes of the 2017, I do want to bring up that Representative Tom Peterson, as mentioned earlier, he is working on a bill as well that would change the adopted standard from the 2017 to the 2009. So it would revert back to the 2009 ANSI A117. However, with that said, everything that is being submitted from July 1st of this year until July 1st of next year would still be under the 2017 as the governing accessibility standard. The reason for this is federally, the states are required to meet the accessibility guidelines, the ADA guidelines. And this is the first time in ANSI A117's history that the ANSI A117 has significantly been more restrictive than the ADA guidelines. And so the reason why Representative Peterson is running this is because the 2009 ANSI A117 is more in line with the ADA guideline standard. So federally, it meets the federal requirement, but the state has adopted the 2017 ICC A117. So again, it's still the governing code, but it may change this coming year. So still pay attention, please. A couple of changes in Chapter 1 that I just wanted to cover briefly. Calculation of percentages, where the determination of the required size or dimension of an element or facility involves ratios or percentages, rounding down for values less than 1/2 shall be permitted. So it's been common practice up till now, if you're calculating number of accessible parking stalls required and you come up with a 5.2 requirement, it automatically kick you up to 6, because anything above the threshold required an additional space. This now allows you to round down, which hadn't been codified previously. Also, dimension tolerances. All dimensions are subject to conventional industry tolerances, except where the requirement is a range within standard minimum and maximum endpoints. So this is important when we're considering our shower stalls and whatnot, where we have a 60-inch requirement. So the code just says flat out 60 inches. This now especially gives our inspectors some leeway to say it's acceptable because it's within industry tolerances. As you all know, it's really hard to try to rough frame in a shower stall at the backer board, grout and tile and hit it right exactly at 5 feet. So there are some leeway there. However, it doesn't apply if there's a minimum and maximum standard. So if it's given a range, it does need to be within that range. We can't say 48.5 is okay if 48 is our max. All right, so one of the biggest changes in the 2017 is our turning spaces. So turning spaces have now been broken up between new buildings and facilities and existing buildings and facilities. Throughout the 2017 A117, you're going to find sections that'll say new buildings, existing buildings. There's almost 2 standards there versus new and existing. Now, it doesn't define what an existing building is. And so when you're doing say a tenant improvement in a shell building, it would definitely be a good idea to reach out to your AHJ and make sure if they're considering it to be a new build or an existing build. If all else fails, the safe thing to do is just design it as a new building. But if it's an existing building, there are different standards that you can follow. Obviously, you can still provide the requirements for a new building, but in an existing, if you're having a hard time making the dimensions and clearances work, you are given a little leeway. So in a new building, we now have a 67-inch turning radius. Now, our 67 turning radius, you can include some knee and toe clearance. However, that has been restricted. You can now only have 10 inches maximum of knee and toe clearance counted in your turning radius. So as you can see in the diagram there, the shaded area is the only area that you can count knee and toe clearances within your turning radius. This is a big change because we used to be able to count basically all the way around the turning radius, knee and toe clearances. So it's kind of shaped like a wedding cake, where the center you would have your full turning, but then around you could have knee and toe clearance. That's no longer allowed. You're limited to that 10 inches. The idea behind this is individuals in a motorized wheelchair have a solid back on their apparatus that won't fit under knee and toe clearances. So we can only count it on a portion of the turning radius. For existing buildings, we're still allowed to have a 60-inch turning radius. However, the knee and toe clearance has changed on this as well. So we can now only have a 25-inch maximum knee and toe clearance overlap, and that's only on the stated section. So it can't be around the entire turning radius. It's only on 25 inches of that turning radius. For our new buildings, for our T-shaped turning space, we now have 3 options. They've all been increased, but you do have different options that you can play with to see which one best fits your space. So our option 1 is going to be a 68 by 60 T space, but we can chamfer off the corners with an 8-inch chamfer. The arms are 16-inch minimum on each side with a 24-inch leg. Option 2 is our typical turning radius, just a little bigger. It's 64 inches in width, 60 in depth, with 30-inch arms and 42 leg with 11-inch indent. Option 3 is just a slight variation of that, where it's 64 by 60, 40-inch minimum leg width there, and arm. On our overlaps, for the knee and toe clearance, you can only use the overlap for the base and one arm. For our T-shaped turning space in existing buildings, it's pretty much the same, 60-inch by 60-inch with 36-inch base and arms. There again, your overlap can include one arm and the base. Clear floor spaces for new buildings and facilities has now been increased again due to motorized wheelchairs. They're a little bigger, so everything's kind of been upsized, especially when it comes to new buildings and facilities. So our new clear floor space in a new building is 52-inch minimum, 30-inch in depth. For existing buildings, we now have 48-inch minimum in length, 30 inches minimum in depth. Reach ranges hasn't changed much, except for, as we talked earlier, fuel dispensing apparatuses do need to be accessible, and we are given a little bit of leeway on those fuel dispensing devices, in that you are allowed to have a 54-inch maximum reach range above the floor. So it gives you just a little extra room there to try to make those work if you're designing a Maverick or whatnot. For operable parts, previously the code said that operable parts required by ANSI A117 must meet the reach ranges and be accessible. However, this section has now changed to where it's just flat out says operable parts must meet the reach ranges except for the items listed below. So our receptacles serving a dedicated use where 2 or more receptacles are provided in a kitchen, on and on down the list. So our floor receptacles and whatnot do not need to be accessible, but just take a look at that list when you're designing and make sure that if you have operable parts, they're either on this list or they're meeting the accessibility reach range requirements. For accessible routes, those have been increased. So an interior accessible route is 36 inches. However, for an exterior accessible route, it's now been changed to 48 inches. I'm trying to get through this. So for our clear width accessible route in new buildings, you can see here it's been increased for a 52-inch space, 36 inches wide. We are allowed to reduce that down to 32 inches for a maximum of 24 inches. For the exterior, it's 48 inches. Again, we're allowed to reduce it down to 32 for a maximum of 24 for that 52-inch space, as long as that 52-inch space is provided. For our existing buildings, they've been increased a little bit. So it's 48-inch minimum, 36-inch minimum in width, and then for the exterior, just the same there. There has been some changes to our clear width at 180-degree turn. So in new facilities, again, it distinguishes between new and existing. We do need to have the same 60-inch minimum in depth, 36 in width, but our 48 has now been changed to 52 inches in between. Same thing with our option 2, looks very much the same, except for 48 has been changed to 52. Then we also have a third option where you're allowed to reduce down to 43 inches, but you do need to provide 43 inches on your path leading up to the turn and going away from the turn. For existing buildings, those have not changed for our 180-degree turn. So these look the same as they did previously. So if you're doing an existing building, you had a 180-degree turn, it should still be compliant. We do have a new section now. It's for our clear width at a 90-degree turn. So our 90-degree turns, you do have options for your 90-degree turns. Option 1, you're allowed a 36-inch minimum aisleway, but at our turn we have to have 40 inches with a 28-inch offset at the turn, and then your exiting area there is 36 inches as well. Option 2 is an 8-inch chamfer, so you can have a 36-inch approach and exit, but an 8-inch chamfer, and that will satisfy a 90-degree turn. And then our option 3 is a 38-inch minimum aisle leading up to the turn and 42-inch going away, or vice versa. Just keep those in mind when you have your 90-degree turns. Oh, and I believe we do have one more option. Yes, 36-inch aisle and 44. So keep those in mind when you have your 90-degree turns. Again, those are for new buildings. For your turns in existing buildings, it's just your typical 36-inch by 36-inch. So keep that in mind, new versus existing. We do have some new requirements that we need to address on those 90-degree turns. We've had some changes to our accessible routes. This looks very similar. Really, the only change here is being consistent with our T-shaped turning space. It needs to extend 52 inches beyond the intersection. So you can see here this dimension as for our one leg has been changed to 52 inches. Passing spaces, we do need to have those every 200 feet, and they do need to be 60 inches in depth, 60 inches in width, not less than 36 inches for the aisle. So for existing buildings, they pretty much look the same as they did in the 2009. We need to have our passing spaces every 200 feet. You can do it with either an alcove or you can do the T-turn option. Maneuvering clearances around doors. Just slight change to these. As you can see, the areas highlighted in blue. Our clearances have changed from 48 inches to 52 from front push, and then from a hinge side has been changed to 42 and 22. For clearances at sliding doors, again, the dimension's been made a little bigger. We have to have the 52 inches perpendicular to the doorway. If our approach is perpendicular to the doorway, 0 for parallel. And then for opening doorways without doors from the front, that's been changed to 52 inches. If it's an existing building, you still are allowed to have 48, which is the same as the previous doors that we talked about. You're still allowed to use the 48 rather than the 52 if it's an existing building. A new requirement has been added for the operating force for door and gate hardware. We now have operating force for forward pushing or pulling motion of 15 pounds and a rotational motion of 28 inch pounds. So before, our requirement was just on the door itself. We now have a requirement for the weight that it requires to operate the latch or hardware itself. And then just a quick note on ramps. Ramps have changed a little bit in that ramps that change direction between runs at landings shall have a clear landing of 60 inches by 60 inches. So rather than referring you back to section 304, it now just says you need to provide 60 inch by 60 inch clear landing. So I know we covered a lot of information quickly. Again, that's just a brief overview. By no means is it all encompassing of the changes that are in the 2017 ANSI A117. Make sure to use that link and dive into the code. If you have any questions, by all means, please give me a call, shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, or any ideas that you want to bounce off of me. So let me put contact information back up there. There's my contact information. Please feel free to use it and see if I can help you out. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Bruce.
Okay, thank you, George. We appreciate your time. There hasn't been any questions that have been asked, so you must have done a masterful job at explaining all of this. So we appreciate that. Also, really appreciate your willingness to answer any questions that may come up as we work on these projects. I've certainly taken advantage of that. So thank you for that. So given that we don't have any other questions, we'll turn it back to you for the rest of your day and enjoy what's left of it. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.